I had lunch with a man called Colonel Pinto. There was a very popular BBC programme called Spycatcher, and he was a Dutchman, and he worked for the British. He told me this story, that he and his team were the people that went behind the British Army in Holland, and what they did was to get hold of all the people when the officials and everything else, put them into camps to then sort them out and find out whether there are any Nazis or people of risky character. He had a number two who had a photographic memory. He could say to him, so-and-so, so-and-so, what we know about him, and he'd be able to almost recite it off straight away. Very good number two. Anyway, the story is this man told me. They were going through the people that they were capturing at that time, and he that night went out for dinner. When he came back, it was sort of, I don't know, late in the night, 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock like that, and he went up towards the gates for his camp, where all these people were imprisoned temporarily, to check them all out before they were released. And the English sentry, who had just an ordinary rifle, was standing outside there, being harassed and having a hell of an argument with a great tall man, big man, with two girls on his arms. And when the sentry saw Colonel Pinto coming, he said, Sir. So Pinto walked across, a very experienced man, you see, and looked at this big chap standing there, you see, and, what's going on here? He said, sir, this man's tried to take two of these girls from inside the camp out. I'm not allowed to let them go. And he said, and this chap stood with Schmeiser on one thing, Luger automatics on another, grenades and God knows what, you see. So Pinto looked at him and said, what's your name? And he said, King Kong. King Kong. He was boasting, of course, you see. But what his real name was Lindeman Christians. This man was a bully and very big. Pinto was not, you see. And he noticed that he had a captain's pips on his arm, on his sleeve. And when this man was threatening the colonel...
What, you mean for a British Army captain?
Yes, you see. But yes, so the Dutchman, King Kong, had got his pips here on the sleeve, which of course you can't have. And so when he was trying to browbeat the colonel, he went forward and grabbed the things and pulled them off him and said, how dare you have your pips on your sleeve? And when he did that, the man shrunk because he was found out. And he went off, and the two girls were put back in again. Next morning, Pinto went into his office. This is first-hand, I can tell you. Went into his office and said to this number two, what do we know about King Kong? Oh, he said, it's the famous Réseau. Réseau, that is a defense, a partisan gang, as it were. A Réseau in France. And who was in this Réseau? It was run by a man called... Lindemans Christians. He said, we'll do immediate checks on this man. And they started doing checks for several hours on his background. What they found out, that this Réseau was betrayed, and every man in it was killed, with one exception, Lindeman Christians. So he said, let's look at it. We must immediately go and get an arrest warrant, and we'll go to his camp and arrest this man. We've got to look into him. So... they got the warrant, went across to the Dutch headquarters there, you see, and went in, spoke to the duty officer, whatever it is, we got a warrant here for a man called Lindemans Christians. We want to interrogate him. Oh, I said, you can't interrogate him. He's the head of the King Kong Réseau. He's one of the top patriots in our country. They said, nevertheless, we wish to interrogate him. And they said... no, you will have to have a much more higher arrest warrant than this, and it will have to be with a counter stamp of the Netherlands. You've got a British one. You're in Holland now, and you will need this. So he said, right, we'll get it. So they left, and it took them a day to get it. Following morning, he went back, Colonel Pinto, with his number two, with a properly filled-in warrant for the arrest. And when they went in, they said, well, it's terribly sorry, it's late. He's gone on a mission. Mission was to tell the Germans of the British Invasion of Alamein, Operation Market Garden. He betrayed them. Now, years later, I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years later, there was such a kerfuffle in Holland that they were told that Lindemans' Christians, in fact, did not commit suicide and die in the hospital where he was, that they exhumed his body. And he was, in fact, the correct body in the correct grave, Lindemans' Christian. But he was the one that let the Germans know, and they had their reserve units there, as you know. They knew 24 hours beforehand what was going to happen. Talking about Montgomery, his main intention was to get further in, to meet the Russians as soon as he could, as far away from where they were as they possibly could. But Montgomery, in this case now, if I had been Montgomery, not anybody, but if I had been Montgomery, if I got every man, when the tanks couldn't get along the roads because it was mud, I'd have given them all rifles, you know what I mean, and I would have sent them. A man who I went to Libya with, he was a private in 6th Airborne Division. He said, we entrained 5 times to go to the rescue of Arnhem. We had all the aircraft ready, and we entrained, but each time it was cancelled. So we were ready to go and help. In my opinion, we should have gone without any doubt. Landed behind them. If I would have given every tank commander a Sten gun and a rifle and said, we'll walk. It's only 10 miles to get to those men on those bridges. They held out for all those days, you know, John Frost for 5 days against Panther tanks, and that was it.